Okay, I think we are live on Zoom. And I think we are live on YouTube as well, if I'm not mistaken. Just double check. Yep, looking good. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first talk after the summer break. I'm glad to see that there's a couple of people pouring in already. Welcome to tonight's talk. My name is Daniel Messmer. I am the Culture Program Manager at the German American Institute. And I'm very happy to welcome you back after our summer break. We were gone for a month, but now we're back and we are ready to get back into things. And boy, oh boy, do we have a term ahead of us. The elections are coming up. There is a lot going on. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about what we can expect in the next couple of months in a second. But before we get to tonight's talk, I would like to give you a little bit of a view ahead of what we have planned in the next couple of months, because we have a lot of stuff planned, and especially around and for the elections, we have a couple of things planned that might be of interest to you. So I will just go through a couple of events that we have planned for the next weeks and months so that you know what's up. First of all, next week on Tuesday, the 22nd of September, 7 p.m., we have a talk with Dr. Nicole Hirschfelder from the Tübingen University and Esther Urban, who's a Juris Doctor with the Max Planck Institute in Freiburg. And they already did one session where they talked about anti-Black racism and police violence in Germany and the US. And it was sort of a Q&A session where people could send in questions that they had on the topic, on the issue, because the issue is still a current one and the debates and the protests are still going on, and we want to keep the conversation going. So next week, there will be a second installation of that conversation in cooperation with the Karl Schurz Haus in Freiburg, our sister institute. And I would like to invite all of you to come there and ask your questions and listen to what they have to say, because it's going to be interesting. Then on Tuesday, October 6th, we have a very, very great photo exhibit that will open at the German American Institute called Hope Never Fear. Some of you might already have heard about it. It was already shown in Munich at the Amerika House. And it's a really great photo exhibit with photographies by Kelly Schell, who followed Barack Obama and his family on his way from being a senator to becoming the president of the United States. So she followed him during his first campaign and documented how this journey was for him and his family. And the photographs are stunning. They're really great. And we will show those pictures starting on Tuesday, October the 6th. If you're interested in that, there's a lot of more information on our website as well as for the talk that I just mentioned before. Then on Tuesday, the 27th of October, we have a talk that will be in German by Thomas Petersen, who works with the Institut für Demographie in Allensbach. And he will give a talk on the relation between polling and journalism. Because as most of you will remember, back when Hillary Clinton was still competing against Donald Trump, for a long time it looked like she would come out on top, but then in the end she didn't, and a lot of people were stunned by that. And Mr. Peterson will try to answer the question how that can come. How does it happen that the polls show one thing, journalists are sure that the elections will go one way and then they go another way, or how those two entities affect each other. And then finally, on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, I'm sure all of you can guess what's going to happen. We have our election night. We've done it the last elections. We will keep doing it for the elections to come, but this year marks no exception. There will be an election night at the Kino Museum in Tübingen, where we will have a panel discussion right before the election results start trickling in, with people from the Tübingen University as well from the Democrats Abroad, who will discuss the current state of events at that time, among other things. There will be other things going on as well. This year, unfortunately, we'll have to keep things a little bit smaller than they used to. I'm sure you can imagine that hosting an election night party during Corona times has to look a little bit different than what you might be used to as well. But enough about that. If you want to know more about our program, you can find all the info on our website. You can follow us on social media, where we keep you informed on everything that we have planned and going on. But now let's talk about tonight. Tonight is a talk that fits in with the election theme as well. I'm very glad to welcome Paul Rundquist to the stage, as it is. He has been working with many universities in the United States. He is an expert on politics, on what's it called? Law? Is that what I'm looking for? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Anyway, he's been working with a lot of universities in the United States. He has been a part of all the last impeachment processes. He just told me about that again a couple of minutes ago. So he was in the White House during the impeachment process against Nixon. He was there when Bill Clinton was on trial, or the debate was going on the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And now he is in Halle, where he teaches currently. And I'm very glad that he's here today to tell us a little bit about what the election year looks like, what has been going on, what we can expect from the next couple of months. Voter fraud, mail-in ballots, probably or possibly postponing the elections. There's a lot been going on in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure there's a lot to talk about. So before I hand things over to him, just a little information for you. If you have questions during the talk, there is a question and answer feature on Zoom. So for those of you watching on Zoom, below the video, you see a little button that says Q&A or F&A, depending on which language your system is running in. And you can click on that and then send in questions through that. And I will see them. And then after Paul is done with the talking part of the talk, we can go over to the question part, where we can answer some of the questions, or as many of them as we can. So yeah, I hope you will enjoy this talk as much as I am about to. And I will hand things over to you, Paul.
Well, Daniel, thanks very much. It is a great pleasure to be even electronically back in Tübingen again. I wish it was in person, but you can't always have what you want, as Donald Trump would say in the campaign songs that he's using. And tonight I want to get an overview of, in a sense, how we got to this point in this election year, and also to talk about some of the things that might be happening in the future. And I also desperately want to keep my talk short enough so that we have enough time for questions, so that we can raise issues that are important to you, and get a chance to talk about them, and perhaps enlarge the focus of the talk that we've got here today. Let's start with the issue that a sitting president, Donald Trump, any other sitting president, has an expectation that they will get nominated for a second term in office. Most of the time, going so far back as the beginning of the 20th century, very few sitting presidents have been denied an opportunity to run for a second term by their parties. There have been, as far as I can count, 5 different such episodes over the more than 25 presidential elections we've had since the turn of the century, of the 20th century. And only 2 sitting presidents during that time, Harry Truman in 1952 and Lyndon Johnson in 1968, did not receive a renomination as a presidential candidate by their parties. There were 3 other strong attempts to get rid of the sitting president and nominate somebody else. two by the Republicans, one by the Democrats, but those attempts within the party were defeated. So the fact that Trump was renominated should not have come by anyone as a surprise. And the only serious candidate running against him in the primaries was former Governor Bill Weld, former governor of Massachusetts. And the best he ever did in any of the primaries he was in was to get 10% of the vote in his home state, the state he used to serve as governor. So Trump was never in any trouble during the primary stage, no matter what the stage of the national health was at the time. On the Democratic side, however, there were more candidates than certainly I can remember, okay? What we've got here up on the slide is the first Democratic debate that occurred late last year. And there were so many candidates who had reached the minimum threshold by the party set to be on the debate platform that they needed debates over 2 nights to split the group up. And it was something of a debacle to have so many people participating in the debate at the same time. There were debates that the Democrats held with national television coverage throughout the latter part of 2019 and early 2020. And ultimately, by the time we got into the actual system of the time stage of Democratic Party primary elections in 2020, the number of candidates was whittled down. And by the time we got to the debates ending and going into the primaries, we were basically down to 5 serious remaining candidates: Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, who came as an unknown, a mayor of the city of South Bend, Indiana, which is famous for being the home of Notre Dame University and the Notre Dame University football team, but not for producing a mayor that you want to immediately elect president. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and if I can get my screen out of the way, Amy Klobuchar, so senator from Minnesota. And the thing that's important in the narrative today is how badly Joe Biden did in the early primaries. Okay, Biden has a horrible track record in the first 3 primary elections. The primaries in Iowa, which is actually a caucus, a meeting of people in each of the voting precincts who affiliate with the Democratic Party, and they meet and discuss who they want to support for president. This is different than a typical primary election where you simply go in and cast a ballot and vote for one person by name on the ballot and leave. Okay, but Biden did badly on the first 3, the Iowa precinct caucuses, the New Hampshire primary, and the Nevada primary. And we've got a list of the success failures on this. But the bottom line is that Bernie Sanders was doing very, very well in these early primary, second in New Hampshire and the Nevada, in Iowa, and winning in New Hampshire and Nevada. Buttigieg won the Iowa precinct caucuses. If we can believe that, okay, the Iowa caucus was so chaotic and the data came in so badly that nobody is really quite sure whether Sanders won or Buttigieg won. And it was a signal that conducting elections in this particular year may not be the easiest thing imaginable. One of the major television journalists in the United States said after the Iowa caucus results were not in for several days after the election, he said, "We don't have to worry about the Russians screwing up our elections. We can do it just as well on our own." So that's a particularly interesting problem. But the bottom line for Joe Biden was after the first three primary elections were done, Biden was one election away from probably withdrawing as a candidate. Okay. And then comes the South Carolina primary. A word about this. This is historically the important primary in the early spring in the United States, because Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada have one major thing in common. They don't have many Black voters in their states. The Black population in Iowa and New Hampshire is very small. Nevada has a very large Hispanic population, but relatively small Black population. And so, in a sense, for Democrats, South Carolina is an important test of how well you can do in getting the support among Black voters, because Black voters in a Democratic primary count for about 60% of all the votes that will be cast in a Democratic primary. The most important politician in the Democratic Party in the state of South Carolina is a Congressman, Jim Clyburn, and you see his picture up on the screen with Joe Biden. The weekend before the Democratic primary in South Carolina, Clyburn went on television and gave a very emotional speech supporting Joe Biden for president. And in effect, he encouraged the Black community in South Carolina to support Biden with the phrase that has gone all over the country: "We know Joe, and Joe knows us." The bottom end is a stunning victory for Biden in South Carolina, 49% of the vote, more than doubling the votes that Bernie Sanders received there, and basically relegating Buttigieg and Warren to the bottom of the list of voting candidates. This was the only state where a millionaire candidate, Steyer, managed to get a significant portion of the votes, just over 10%, and he subsequently withdrew from future primaries and supported Biden. 4 days after the South Carolina primary, the Tuesday after that was called Super Tuesday. It's a historical thing in the United States going back now for almost 40 years of clustering a number of primaries on the same day throughout the country. And it's a way of testing how the candidates can do when they have more than one thing to do at the same time. It's difficult. It's a test to see how well your campaign is organized if you can run simultaneously in multiple states. And the bottom line is the voter support that suddenly emerged for Biden in the South Carolina primaries transferred to most of the states that were in the Super Tuesday run of primaries. Biden came out ahead of everybody else in 10 of the primaries. Bernie Sanders won in 4 of the primaries, coming in first with Biden second. And I have to mention for historical purposes that Michael Bloomberg, the former Republican, formerly independent businessman and former mayor of New York, who decided to run in the Democratic primaries. This is because of his late organization of the campaign. This was the first election day that he had a lot of states in which his name appeared on the ballot. He won in only one state, American Samoa. American Samoa has delegates at the Democratic National Convention, as do all of the other American territories and possessions. And this is the only primary that Bloomberg won, and he withdrew shortly thereafter to support Biden. On March 17th, this is St. Patrick's Day, otherwise a very important holiday in the United States, not an official holiday, but everybody who claims to have some sort of Irish ancestry celebrates St. Patrick's Day. The federal government announced a shutdown of its facilities because of the virus pandemic. And the end effect of that was that campaigning in a traditional sense stopped. And for all intents and purposes, the primary season for the Democratic Party was over. Many states postponed their presidential primaries until a later time during the summer. Some states still have not held primary elections to choose their statewide candidates. As we speak, the voters in the state of Delaware are going to the polls today and choosing candidates for senator. There's a senatorial election going on, and there's contested primaries for both the Democratic and Republican nominations for senator in the state of Delaware. The primary should have occurred months ago, was postponed because of the virus. And effectively, once the major shutdown from the virus began, campaigning was fruitless. And on April 8th, Bernie Sanders, who had been campaigning and trying to keep his campaign going, announced the futility of it, stopped campaigning, and announced his support for Biden, which left us with an enormous emptiness in what was going on in the United States, because things were quiet. There's nothing to do until the party conventions at the end of August, except for occasional speaking. Okay, occasional speaking, Joe Biden from his basement doing Zoom type broadcasts and Skype type broadcasts and interviews with the media, as he did not campaign in large public or forums, and the President of the United States appearing on television pretty much on a daily basis to talk about, officially, to talk about the virus and the virus developments, but also to use as a nice political forum and platform. And so tremendous loss in campaigning. And in fact, I mentioned how the party conventions have changed. This is important to me because party conventions made me into the political junkie I turned out to be. My family and grandparents, Swedish grandparents, lived in a 2-apartment house. And my parents lived on the upper floor. My grandparents lived on the lower floor. And in 1956, my grandfather announced that he was finally going to buy a television set. He had not had one until then. And he went out and bought the largest television set he could then find. The screen was 50 centimeters across. My parents and I were astonished at this huge television set because our television set was only 14 inches instead of over 20. And so I went to my grandparents' place every day to watch television on the big TV. The problem was, this was during the Democratic Party's national nominating convention in 1956. And as an 8-year-old, I was exposed to 3 broadcast networks showing the convention live for hours every day, as well as the one local channel, because the party convention was in my hometown, Chicago. So all of the television was showing the same thing, and I became hooked on what I was watching. It was a wonderful educational experience, and I became a political junkie as a result of it. The convention this year was interesting. It was an example of adapting to new sorts of things. The Republican convention featured Trump and almost every Trump relative you can imagine, sons, daughters, in-laws, giving speeches. Some, but not all, of the major Republican Party officials were speaking on that. And a similar effect was going on in the Democratic conventions with Biden and the new folks. The interesting thing is how the conventions and how the viewing shows how America is divided. In overall audience broadcast results, the Democrats beat the Republicans in the size of the television audience for their conventions. On cable television, the Fox network, very conservative broadcast channel, led in audiences by a 2-to-1 margin over other cable networks that were more towards the political center or left. And on cable TV during the Democratic convention, the most left-wing television channel, MSNBC, got a 5-to-1 viewer margin over Fox and 5-to-4 margin over the centrist CNN. And the lesson, of course, on this is what you watch tells us who you are politically, okay? And the argument is going out that it's time to fundamentally change political conventions in future years because they no longer quite serve the purpose for which they were originally established back in the early 19th century. And of course, in Germany, there's the same sort of discussion going on about party days and party conferences as well at this point. We have to mention here, of course, Kamala Harris getting the Democratic nomination as the vice president's candidate for this. She is not the first woman to be nominated as a vice presidential candidate. One for the Democrats, Geraldine Ferraro on the left, one for the Republicans, Sarah Palin, and now her. The 2 previous nominations have not helped the presidential candidates who picked them. There were questions about Palin's fitness for national office and her level of knowledge about national political and policy issues. And there were concerns that Geraldine Ferraro's husband, who, like Donald Trump, was involved in New York City real estate development, might have been involved in some questionable illegal dealings in his housing business. Harris is a well-experienced prosecutor in the courts in San Francisco, where she served as a district attorney, the chief attorney for the city. where she was Attorney General in the state of California, managing the largest legal enterprise in the United States, short of the Federal Department of Justice, and now as a U.S. Senator from California, where she played an important role in investigation of the Trump administration leading to impeachment. So what does this tell us? We're going to have debates soon. It's only 2 weeks until the first presidential debate is going to occur up in Cleveland, Ohio, followed shortly thereafter by a vice presidential debate, and thereafter by 2 more presidential debates later in October. The important thing to remember is that because of the interesting election laws in the United States, 8 states will have already begun early voting, as it's called, before the first campaign debate. And 5 more states have all mail voting. And so they send you your ballot by mail to every registered voter in the state, and you send it back when you're ready to vote, whether that's the day you receive the envelope from the state government or 2 or 3 days before the election itself. The important thing is that this kind of voting practice changes the nature of elections themselves. One of the first politics books I ever read described Election Day as a photograph, a snapshot of the attitudes of the voters, the attitudes of America on the day of the election. Well, that's no longer true. It's a movie picture because we're voting as a country across 6 weeks worth of time. And many people, let's look back 4 years, who voted before the middle of October 4 years ago had a very different sense of what the candidates were like and what the issues were than those who voted after the FBI announced that they were reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, or the subsequent announcement a week later that the FBI was dropping the investigation of Clinton's emails because they found nothing criminal about them. If you voted within any time like that, you were voting in a changed political circumstance, okay? So this is what we have to think about, and certainly what the campaigns have to think about right now, because 80% of the people who say they are voting for Trump say they will vote in person on election day. And about 50% or more of the people who say they're going to vote for Biden say they will vote by mail rather than go stand in line with other people during the virus issues, during the virus pandemic. So we'll see how this affects things. How is this going to affect things? I want you to look at this map briefly. This is a map produced by the government about the incidence of virus cases over the last week, okay? The color you don't want to have is red. Orange or red, you are in fairly unhealthy conditions with a noticeable number of cases per 1,000 people in your state. If the color is yellow, you have a few cases, but really nothing to worry about much. And the states that and the areas that are in white have no cases reported over the past week. Okay, this shows you the map of the United States. And when we go to political maps about the United States, you'll see how this changes things and a great deal. This is the 2012 election. For any Democrat, this running for president, this is the model you want to follow. This was a victory by Barack Obama for his second term. It was not as big a victory as he had for his first term, but it was a victory. And so this is the narrow victory Democratic roadmap that you want as a candidate to try to repeat. Or if you're really being optimistic, to find some other states that are red that maybe you can turn into a blue state on the voting election day. And watch this, because we're going to go 4 years forward, and you see the difference in the map. And this is the Donald Trump map, where you can see the states that he pulled in that previously had been Barack Obama's. And the most important of the states are in the north edge between Minnesota, the blue state with 10 electoral votes, and New York, the states particularly Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those three states with a complete election margin in all three states totaling no more than 100,000 votes resulted in Trump's victory. And so if you are Donald Trump, this is how you got to be president. You want to hold on to that result, and you want to try to expand it if possible, but you definitely don't want to lose any of the states you won unless you can guarantee picking up one or more states that will equal the electoral votes that you lost when you lost one of the red states you carried 4 years ago. And remember as well that there are a lot of other elections going on presidential election days. My German students have always been astonished by the number of votes voters have to cast on election days most of the time. They are accustomed to learning about German voters having 2 votes, going in and voting for a single member for the Bundestag, and then using a second vote to show party support. Okay. Well, no. Okay. We're going to have 35 Senate elections in the United States in different states. Some states are like Georgia are lucky. They're going to have 2 Senate elections at the same time. It's amazing. Okay. And most of those Senate seats that are up for election are currently held by Republicans. So statistically, the Republicans have more to lose in this election than the Democrats do. And so this is an opportunity for the Democrats who need to pick up votes to control the Senate to get the number of seats they need in order to have a majority in the Senate, or perhaps even a higher amount. In the House of Representatives, all the House seats are up for election. And in the last election in 2018, the Democrats gained the majority by picking up 40 seats in the House of Representatives that used to be Republican, that were Republican in the 2016 election. Okay, so the Democrats want to keep that majority as best they can. In a miracle, they'd like to enlarge it a bit because more people are voting than voted for 2 years ago, but we'll see what happens there. There are governors in 11 states, and with the governor elections come a number of other elections for subordinate executive branch officials within each of these states, and the state legislatures in 43 states in the United States are also being elected. So this is a huge election, and anybody who goes in to vote in person is going to take an awful long time to vote for all the people they have to choose among. So that's something to think about on how election day is going to run, and how even people who are voting from home on absentee ballots need to figure out who to vote for as the ballot gets longer and longer. Now, money. Just yesterday, Mike Bloomberg, the candidate who dropped out with all the money that we talked about earlier, announced that he was going to spend $100 million in campaign costs in the state of Florida to help Joe Biden, and basically to help Democrats in the state of Florida to turn out their vote, either by mail-in ballots or by getting people to the polls on election day. And Bloomberg said he was focusing on Florida to free up money so that the Biden campaign could spend money on other interesting states. Controlling Florida is essential in any Democratic effort to enlarge their electoral vote margins. And it's a good insurance factor in case they lose some of those states that went orange against them last time again. And similarly, the Republicans are having their big donors coming in and trying to help out the Trump campaign as well. Bottom line is that both national candidates are likely to spend $1 billion each, if not more, between now and election day. And then we've got the subject that everybody knows and very few people are talking about. During the quiet political period when there were no elections going on, we became aware of just how many Black people in the United States were being killed by police. We knew that before. This is not new. But what happened this time was that it got much more media attention because there wasn't much news other than the virus to talk about. And so it was also at a period of time where the lockdowns of the virus were opening up and people could come out on the streets more readily, and people came out on the streets to show their support. The important thing about this is that it is a multi-ethnic protest. Large numbers of white, Hispanic, Asian protesters joined the protests that began with Black protests. And as the protests gathered and lengthened and continued, the violence within individual cities in the United States increased as well, until we hit perhaps the highest recent development was last weekend, the murder of two police officers in Compton, California, as the two police officers were sitting in their police car. So there's a lot going on with this. Trump is campaigning as the candidate of law and order, saying that the local governments are unwilling to take the steps necessary to shut down violence, shut down protests, and Biden is trying to have it both ways, supporting Black rights, but not supporting violent protests. As a white person, all I can say is, if people in my neighborhood were being victims so often of police tactics that were excessive, was going on, I'd be out protesting too. Let's move off for editorial. We can handle that in questions later. but it's a symbol of the extraordinarily strong divide between the United States and everybody, between people in the United States and their neighbors. There's going to be a series of slides coming up put together by the Pew Research Foundation. Very serious organization that examines public opinion on a slow and methodical way. They have a wonderful website. Any of you who are teachers in the audience who want to expose your students to some of the kind of research that goes on in these American think tanks, try the Pew Research Foundation's homepages and use some of the surveys they've got on a wide variety of subjects in addition just to politics. And what you see here is the difference of opinion between Republicans and Democrats, or Trump voters and Biden voters on standard issues, okay? On, for example, an issue of it's more difficult to be a Black person in this country. 9% of the Trump voters agree with that statement. 74% of the Biden voters, or people who say they'll vote for Biden, agree with that statement. Immigrants. You ask the Trump voters, should there be more immigrants? They're an asset to the country. A third of the Trump voters say that. 84% of the Biden voters. Islam. Islam does not encourage violence any more than other religions do. Again, there's a 50-point difference between the Democrats and Republicans' support of that statement. And similarly, a 50% percentage point difference on the equality of women in modern society. You can go on to other cultural divides questions on various religious groups on key issues here. Okay, I put this in because it is the 50th anniversary of a question in the Census Bureau that the census every 10 years asks. And the first time this question appeared was in 1970, and it was seeking to find the number of instances in which there were persons of opposite sex sharing living quarters. This was a wonderful question. It was finding out how many people were living together without the benefit of marriage, okay? Very controversial question back there. My future wife and I were very pleased to respond to that question. And you see, 50 years later, there's still a very strong cultural divide based on religious affiliation or non-affiliation on this question, okay? Americans have negative views on aspects of political systems, says the next Pew result, the next Pew survey. And the interesting thing on this one is that there are a lot of subjects on which the Democrats and Republicans are fairly close to each other. If you look at the bottom questions on this, okay? Elected officials face serious consequences for misconduct. The Democrats and the Republicans are pretty close in saying, no, that doesn't happen. They don't pay a price. On the issue of whether government is open or transparent, Democrats and Republicans both think it's not open and transparent enough. The tone of political debate is respectful. Yeah, both Democrats and Republicans say it's not. Campaign contributions do not lead to a greater political influence. Democrats and Republicans say that's garbage. Okay. Judges are not influenced by the political parties or elected offices. Both the Democrats and Republicans have doubts about that. And people agree on basic facts, even if they disagree politically. The bottom line is not a chance. We don't even agree on the basic facts anymore. Okay, that shows a horrifying breakdown of community values, I think, in many things. Now, just to make everybody worried about the elections, is this other poll here, which asks, which party do you think can do a better job on certain subjects? Okay, and so the Democrats win on the survey saying they can do better on climate change, abortion and contraception policies, health care, and then nobody's got a majority, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans. Half the people don't think less than half the people think the Democrats can do a good job on race or ethnicity. Their only benefit is that fewer people think the Republicans can do a good job. But what's important to worry about and to watch for the future of this campaign is the number of issues on which these poll responders think the Republican Party can do better than the Democrats. Foreign policy, budget deficit, law enforcement and criminal justice, gun policy, the economy, and terrorism. Okay, so there is a view among lots of American voters that the Republican Party is, in fact, the party that can do a better job on certain issues. And then we don't know about the virus, okay? We're pushing towards 200,000 deaths in the United States, and we will break 200,000 probably by the end of this week. And the estimates are that it will be about 350,000 by election day. And there are just so many things that have gone wrong in planning for this, okay? But if you look back on an earlier, one of those earlier Pew polls, people distrust the ability of government to act. And I'll point out something I pointed out in lectures 4 years ago. In the United States, it wasn't the federal government, it wasn't the Environment Protection Agency of the federal government that found out that Volkswagen, Daimler, and other companies, automobile companies, were cheating on emission standards to have dirtier cars on the road. It wasn't the federal government of the United States that discovered this. It was a bunch of graduate students in the University of West Virginia who were looking to put together some research on a doctoral dissertation by setting up a mobile emissions recorder that they could fit on the top of their car, okay, and eliminate the laboratory tests for emissions. And it was this bunch of students who found the cheating, not the government, not the experts, okay, and we're in the government. And so, in a sense, the American government has continued its inability to act in a systematic way, okay? Now, the private sector is also to blame. I just spent a long flight coming from the United States back to Germany after my stay in the United States was extended because of American rules and German rules and European Union rules and things like that. But the best mask to wear during this virus is the so-called N95 mask. Where is the N95 mask made? It is made at a company called 3M. 3M is actually the abbreviation for a company called Minnesota Mine and Manufacturing Company. It is a major American firm. And the bottom line was that the 3M company was busy selling N95 masks to other countries than the United States, other customers than American customers. And the federal government refused to use its legal authority to force 3M to supply the domestic market. They could have done that and they didn't. So this has been a tremendous mistake, a tremendous failure on the part of government policymakers and those who would execute the policy. And I appreciate being able to get my first virus test when I stepped off the plane in Frankfurt Airport. And I appreciate being able to get test results within 6 hours, when a test in the United States, if you can get it, will take results about 7 days. The economy went into the tank, but bear in mind, potential Democratic supporters, that until the end of February, the economy was the best it had been in American history since the 1950s. The unemployment rate among all groups in the workforce was at 3.5%, a number that had not been hit since the middle 1950s. And Donald Trump is not lying necessarily when he says Black people never had it so well. The unemployment rate among Black workers in the United States was down under 6%, a remarkably low number for that group. Okay, having said that, once the shutdown started, the numbers skyrocketed, okay? And so you've seen the rapid increase by these numbers in April and May, and slow return to something closer to acceptable. I don't know. I don't know if 8.25% is acceptable. That's about what the level of unemployment was during the 2008 recession, okay, in the United States. But what is troubling to me watching this is how uneven the recovery of the employment situation has been. In a sense, white people always benefit, always have more jobs than the other groups, but the other groups are comparatively slow in gaining their jobs back. Okay, they're very slow in getting back, and unusually, we have seen a substantially slow return in jobs among Asian ancestry Americans in the workforce. That is a surprising development. Okay, so this is going to be an issue of the relative unemployment standards among various groups in the United States, and the fact that financial support has run out from the federal government, and the Congress, Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate will need to find some sort of solution to that or pay a political price. The national debt. We've been spending in the United States as much money as the federal government can print. And I'm being overly blunt here, but that's correct. The economy lost about $2 trillion in gross domestic product as a result of the shutdowns and other problems with the economy. And the government has stepped in to spend and borrow and to provide money and stimulus to the economy, a very necessary thing. The end result is that the United States has now hit the horrifying and risky plateau of having a national debt which is greater than the gross domestic product of the American economy in an average year. So we are now at about 103% of GDP as the national debt limit. Germany, by comparison, even though it is spending more than it's taking in this year, is about 79% of German GDP, the German debt level. That shows you the comparison. And so the question is, what's that going to do? It's going to weaken the strength of the American dollar, and it's going to have tremendous impact on inflationary pressures in the United States. But the United States government does not want to stop the inflation because that would increase the interest rates and therefore increase the amount of money that has to be paid in interest off this debt. It is a difficult problem. And now let's talk for 2 minutes about what's going on in Europe and American alliances. Trump is a bilateral politician. He wants two-country agreements on trade, on defense issues, things like that. He is not a multilateral supporter. Biden is more multilateral. He is a supporter of trade agreements, but he is also a strong supporter of workers' rights and labor unions. And as a result of that, he would probably change his focus on multilateral trade negotiations to have better protection for workers in the United States, and also to try to increase the workers' pay in trade partner countries as well. That's going to be interesting. And the movement of American troops out of Germany is, I think, unfortunate. Years ago, when I was in the Army training to be an officer, they trained us on how to go backwards as slowly as possible in Europe so that we could wait until enough supplies came from the United States to counter any hostilities further east. Removing troops from Germany and from Europe generally does not seem like a great idea to me. And security, okay? Lots of questions to think about here. The American debate just moved into environment because of the fires in California and Oregon and Washington. They're arguing with each other about further developing oil reserves in the United States versus going further into green environmental energy. Are economic sanctions the only thing we can do in security issues? Okay. What do? Do you want to watch a portion of Georgia being taken away? Do you want to watch a portion of the Ukraine be taken away? Do you want to watch Belarus subject to pressure and do nothing other than sanctions that can be easily avoided or absorbed? What more can we do? What more are we willing to do? That's a subject for further discussion, whoever is president at January 3rd. I've got at the bottom here some things you can read online. We'll try to make the PowerPoint available to all of you who want it. And you can go to the URLs here and read some interesting articles that I came across in putting this together. And I'll close with the last example of the divisions in American society. The American Professional Football League started last weekend, and the Football League organized a moment of silence at the beginning of the football game to show the support of the league in the ongoing fight for equality in our country. And at the opening football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Texans, the Kansas City Chiefs won the football championship last year. There was booing, to put it in German terms, whistling, during the moment of silence by some fans, a large chunk of fans in the stadium to that. Okay, that shows just how divisive the United States is on most things. And I should stop talking here now to allow some questions. Thanks very much for inviting me. As I said, it's good to be back in Tübingen, even if it is in a virtual sense. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. This was, wow, my head is still spinning. It's not easy. It really is not easy. And I want to be hopeful. I'm more curious to see what the next months or weeks will bring. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them through the question and answer function, or type them up in the chat. I can see that as well. But maybe to start things off, we've talked a little bit about mail-in ballots. What do you think? Can we expect an election result within, I mean, election day or even the days after? Or what do you think?
Well, this is a problem where there's so much diversity. Each state sets its own rules about how they issue paper mail ballots and how they count them, how quickly they count them. Okay, and you've got this is going to be a horrible problem for the media. You've probably got 50 different states with 50 different sets of rules about this that anybody who is trying to report on election night returns in these states needs to take into account. Now, I'm a registered voter in the state of Florida, okay? I expect that I will receive my mail-in ballot in the mail here in Germany by the last week of September, okay? That's when I've received it before. And you take this ballot, you vote for the candidates you want to on this rather long ballot, okay? We're talking about a ballot that has perhaps 20 different offices for which you are encouraged to vote on who you want. And then you have to mail it back. In this case, since this is a foreign ballot, I've got to pay an exorbitant amount of postage to get this back to the United States. And with the absence of regular airline flights, such as we had before, that's going to be interesting to see how fast it takes to get this airmail postal ballot back to Florida in my voting district in Tampa to get it back to the election authorities there. Most states in the United States do not count the mail ballots until the election night. So these mail-in ballots may have been coming in for weeks before the election, but they're not counted until the election day ends in their state. And to complicate this still further, this early voting process begins in most states in the United States. And certainly 40 of the 50 states have early voting beginning no later than 10 days before the elections themselves. And so an older person or somebody who doesn't want to stand in line for 3 hours to vote can go to the central election authorities and vote early when the lines are shorter, the wait is shorter, and do it that way. So we've got mail-in ballots, we've got early ballots, and then we've got the voting on election day. So there's 3 different things going on at the same time that you've got to sort through. And if so many people vote by mail, as it seems they will this year, I don't see how it's possible to get reliable election results on election night or even election morning. I think it would be more reasonable to say that we'll have election returns by the end of election week. Okay, it's exactly 7 weeks until election day tonight. Okay, I would be really happy if by close of business on Friday after the elections, the states that were close finally came in with a final result. Yeah, and just of course to make this clear, there are a whole bunch of states that are not competitive. Okay, There is no way a Republican presidential candidate is going to win California or New York. You don't waste any money going into those states, except for symbolic presence. Hillary Clinton won those two states by total margins of 6 million votes. If you remove California and New York from the numbers 4 years ago, Donald Trump won the popular vote in the remaining 48 states. Okay, so there are also 20 states in the middle of the country that always vote Republican. And so you really have perhaps 10 to 15 states that are truly competitive on which party is going to win a majority of a plurality of the votes in those particular states. And so you can get a sense from the states that are surely Republican and surely Democratic on how things are going, but it's the swing states that tell the story and will be hardest to get data for.
All right, thank you. Then a viewer question that just came in. How do you think the transatlantic relations will change in case President Trump gets reelected?
I have a hard time imagining how they will improve. Now, I'm not totally opposed to Trump's policies. Okay, I'm a child of the Cold War. I think spending 2% of gross domestic product on defense is not really a bad idea. Okay, by the same token, I also hold very strange views. I believe in compulsory military service. I figure a democracy should never have an army composed only of people who want to be there. Okay, you should get a bunch of civilians who think like civilians in your army, and everybody moving away from that. But I don't see how the relationships are going to improve. But at the same time, I don't see how Great Britain, for example, can easily enter into a trade agreement, a bilateral trade agreement with the United States without causing immediate and very loud political problems for the conservative government in the UK on farming issues, for example, or on fishing issues and things like that. So I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go. Now, I've done a bunch of work in Poland. I was a Fulbright professor in Poland for 2 years back in the 90s. And so I have a sense about Poland and the rotating NATO troop assignments into Poland. But the rotating troop situation strikes me as being wasteful and inefficient. You've got to get troops there. That's not something you want to have to do if things go bad quickly. Okay, and the number of troops that are being stationed there on this rotating basis is actually rather small for any kind of major military operation that might be needed to happen. Okay, so I'd somehow prefer more permanent and larger amounts of forces that people would be willing within NATO to send out there. And I know certainly that the folks in the Baltic would like that to happen too. Okay.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers the question. Then another viewer question that came in. Do you think Michelle Obama has had and is having a significant influence on the campaigning process?
Not yet. Okay. She's done a few videos. The problem is campaigning is difficult, and campaigning is especially difficult if you are a candidate who is concerned about the public reaction to the virus. So if you're concerned excuse me, concerned about social distancing and wearing masks, you have a hard time going out and campaigning and doing things that traditionally you would do in an election year. It's going to be interesting to see how much that Barack and Michelle Obama emerge in the campaign. I would rather assume that that's going to be somewhat later in the campaign where you bring them out and to get them out among important groups that you want to motivate. Hillary Clinton waited until too late to use Obama in her campaign 4 years ago. Okay, Hillary never went into the state of Wisconsin, and it was until the last week of the campaign that her political opinion survey people said, we're in trouble in Wisconsin, and they sent Obama out to Wisconsin to not enough of an advantage that late in the campaign. So I think the Biden people will have learned the lesson from 4 years ago and bring the former president and the former first lady back into the political game sooner this year than happened 4 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Do you think the Democrats made the same mistake that they did in 2016 with nominating a person of the establishment? Wouldn't it have been better to nominate a young and quote unquote fresh person?
Yeah. There's been a conflict within the Democratic Party between candidates of the political center and candidates of the farther left, okay? Going back, as early as 1980, when Ted Kennedy campaigned against Jimmy Carter, that primary year, even though Carter was the sitting president, okay? And that happens periodically, and there is always are clusters of left candidates and center candidates in the primaries. And most of the time, it's the center candidates who win out after this primary stage. I think it's important to change generations, okay? I've said before, I think the Democratic leadership is too old and too established, okay? The leading member of the party in the House, the top three, are all 80 or older, okay? You need newer people to come in. And in a sense, it seems strange to say, well, Kamala Harris is a new arrival. She's only been in the Senate for a couple of years, but the answer is yes, but she's 56 years old as well, okay? And so I think, the Democrats, and to a lesser degree, the Republicans, are both playing wait your turn games, okay? And the far left group, the squad up in New York City, the AOC group, have had an impact of trying to bring in absolutely young, relatively inexperienced folks into elective office. And we'll actually see this in the Democratic primary today in Delaware, where the established senator, Democrat, is running against one of these AOC type candidates in her 30s, running for the Senate with really no prior electoral experience except energy and participating effort. And we'll have to see how that works in the state of Delaware. That would be interesting to watch and see how many more happen. But the Democrats have been afraid of change for quite a bit. And they think they are right to be afraid of change, because if they go too far to the left, the independent voters in the political center will vote Republican. That's what they're concerned about. And the view among those center Democrats is one like Bernie Sanders getting the Democratic nomination would be a guarantee of defeat in the presidential election. It might change the future of the party, but it would result in a short-term loss. And so I think the Democrats are afraid to go further left. All right.
Okay, thank you. Another person asks, since you mentioned swing states, there is some talk about the Democrats capturing Texas due to the increase of Democratic-leaning voters, especially in populous areas like Houston or Dallas. Do you think that Biden might win Texas and that the state could become a swing state in the future?
In the future, I agree. As long as the economic trends continue and as long as we don't restrict immigration extensively in the future, I think there is no way you can prevent Texas from becoming more ethnically diverse, and that will benefit the Democrats as you have more Hispanic, Asian, and other groups, and a larger number of Black voters in Texas as well. The Texas population is growing at as fast a rate as California's population did in the 1970s and 80s. And if the census numbers that come out this year are to be believed, Texas will probably get 2 more seats in the House of Representatives because of its population growth. So I think maybe not this election year, but perhaps 4 years from now, there is a real chance that Texas could turn Democratic. It would be good to win a governorship or a Senate seat in Texas for the Democrats for a change as a prelude to this. But so far that hasn't happened. They've come close, but close doesn't quite count yet.
All right, thank you. And then another question: what effect is the U.S. debt going to have on different social classes combined with unemployment and high living costs?
Yeah. That's a difficult thing to imagine, okay? Among poorer people, they're going to be hit with increased food prices unless there is something done to alter the kind of food produced in the United States and who gets it. At the moment, the United States is very occupied in exporting food to China and to other countries, and that reduces the amount of food available in the United States, maintains the prices. But for example, corn, which used to be a staple product in American human diets, 80% of the corn produced in the United States is used for methanol to go into gasoline in cars, okay? And that dominance of using your food products for industrial purposes increases the price that our average consumers are going to pay for the food they're going to get. And the lower income people are the ones who feel that most, okay? Middle class people are going to have the impact as well that houses will cost more once the interest rates go up. We now have this situation where almost anybody in the United States can buy a house because the interest rates are so low. But if you get a mortgage in which the interest rates follow the rates charged by the Federal Reserve in the future when the Federal Reserve says we need to raise the interest rates, and they will eventually. That's going to increase your monthly payments on your house, okay? And that's not something you want to do and be surprised with 5 years down the line when you're making monthly payments on your house mortgage. And so that has the potential for destroying the domestic economy when people start missing their mortgage payments in the future. So that's a problem. And conversely, I think the weakening of the American currency because of the debt issue has the unexpected benefit of causing stock prices to go up on the stock exchange because the investors want to maintain the stability of the value of what they have in the stock. And so if there is a 5% increase in cost of living, you want the stock market to go up 5% to make up for the fact that your money doesn't buy as much as it used to. And so there is two ways out of this, and we have this now, where the stock market is doing very well in New York, but the economy down on Main Street is not doing so well. And so it all depends on where the economic, where you are in the economic area in the country, or which level you are in that economy as to whether you're doing well or you're losing out. Okay. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Maybe
Okay.
one final question before you run out of time. And I think it's an interesting question to end on. Do you personally think President Trump would accept a Biden win? Because he's already insinuated that he might not necessarily accept a result that would not be in his favor.
The whole system works because everybody agrees that it should work. We have not been in a situation where people did not accept the results of the election. Well, we had it a little bit in 2000 with the altered vote count in the state of Florida. In that situation, it was Al Gore, the Democratic candidate for president, who told his supporters, enough, stop protesting. This is the result. I lost, Bush won, shut up and let the system work. There was a challenge in 1960 that the vote totals in the state of Illinois were not honest, and there should be a review of the voting patterns. Nixon, the losing candidate, who might have won if Illinois was turned into a Republican state, Nixon said, enough, stop it. Let's go to January 20th and get Kennedy inaugurated as president. The really worst time came in 1876, when there clearly was election fraud in that election. And it took months of negotiation between the parties to reach a settlement. And in effect, the Republicans who had been doing the vote stealing were declared to be the winner. And in return, the Democrats got what they wanted from the election, which was the removal of federal troops from the southern states after the end of the Civil War. You hope things like that don't happen again, okay? you want the president to walk out of the White House and say, see you, I'm going to go play golf in Florida. If that doesn't happen, the Supreme Court is supposed to be the ultimate ruler on this. Okay. It was the Supreme Court that said, stop counting in Florida. Bush won. Okay, in 2000. Presumably, the Supreme Court would say challenges to the votes in particular states are no longer valid, or they have to stop by now. The date to really look for is December 7th, because that's the day by which time the states have to submit their electoral votes to Washington. Well, they have to meet to cast their votes in their state capitals. If that doesn't work, you have to hope that somebody somewhere says, you've got to go. And I don't know who that is, okay, to be blunt about it. I don't want the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to say, Mr. President, you've got to go. But it could come to that. And if it did, the reputation of the United States as an example of democratic stability just goes right down the drain. Okay, if something happens like that. Or if you end up with street violence in states where the vote is not clear, okay, between Democratic supporters and Republican supporters, just like the violence you've been seeing over Black Lives Matter. Okay, if that breaks out, you're in an extraordinary crisis that requires extraordinary solutions that I'm not sure we are prepared to answer right now. When that 1876 problem came up, there was 5 months from election day until the time the new president took office, and they had time to work out deals like that. We've moved up the change of presidents to January rather than March. You've got less time to reach a solution if it's a really bad problem. So hope for the best.
Hope for the best. Yes, I think that's a great statement to end on. Paul, thank you so much. Thank you for all the insight that you shared tonight. Thank you for your questions, everyone being here. Thank you for taking the time to join us in this really interesting conversation about what's lying ahead. I'm sure there is a lot more to talk about. If you have further questions, you can feel free to send them in via email, and then I can pass them on to Paul.
Please do.
And we will also try to share the PowerPoint presentation. So if you check on our website within the next couple of days, I'm sure you'll be able to find it there. Yeah, but other than that, thank you very much for being here. I hope you had a great night. I hope you will continue to have a great night and also a great week. Please stay connected with us. Come check out our social media if you want to know what we are up to next. But other than that, all I gotta say is thank you very much and good night. See you next time.
Thanks very much for having me.